Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and this is my review of Kichiku Dai Enkai, also known as The Banquet of the Beasts, a Japanese horror movie from 1997 that was directed by Kazuyoshi Kumakiri. Now this director would go on to make a number of impressive non-horror films such as Antenna from 2004, Green Minds, Metal Bats from 2006, and The End of Summer from 2013. As just a few examples. Kichiku Dai Enkai was his feature film debut, but it was also a student film with a very low-budget production behind it. Now, this was made during an era of Japanese horror film that's not covered very often, at least in English-language reviews and videos online. International audiences are not as enamored with this kind of movie, at least when compared to some of the Ghost franchises that followed it. And that is understandable, given the nasty violence that's on display here. If you want some coverage on movies of this kind, check out my Asian horror playlist videos that cover the 1980s and 1990s. I'll include a link in the description box below. There were a bunch of horrifically violent flicks that Japan produced and released during that period. So let's get to the plot synopsis of this one. Loosely inspired by a notorious historical incident, a small group of radical student revolutionaries are holed up in a woodland cabin. While their leader is in jail, his leftist group is controlled by his girlfriend, but her leadership lacks conviction and perspective. When the leader commits suicide in prison, despair and confusion rule the group. Revenge and violence erupts in graphic ways. So the title of this video, review, may seem exaggerated. No, is this really the nastiest Japanese gore movie ever made? Even with all that competition, and there's a lot of competition. But I must say, after 3 viewings over the years, Kichiku Dai Enkai can certainly hold its own against just about any Japanese horror movie in terms of violence. Much of the second half of this film has some of the most graphic, stomach-churning death scenes ever committed to Japanese film. And it's not portrayed in a blackly comedic style, like Machine Girl or Tokyo Gore Police. This film takes itself very seriously, and consequently, a few of these scenes are truly ghastly. Now, from a filmmaking perspective, they are unnerving to watch, and the physical effects are pretty fantastic for a movie with this level of budget. The violence does look disturbingly real, which is one of the reasons why the horror elements are effective. Definitely a strong point of this movie. The practical effects are pretty awesome. Now, I'm warning you, in case you haven't gotten this already, I'm warning you. If you're one of those moviegoers who cannot handle, gore in your movies, do not watch this. Alright? The director did an interview with the Midnight Eye website back in the day, and he stated that he was very angry while making this movie, in part because he broke up with his girlfriend immediately before filming. So that inspired him to get nasty with the violence, apparently. There's no question that Kumakiri was out to make an impact with Kichiku Dai Enkai, and he certainly did so. Now, near the beginning, the filmmakers infused a bunch of actual documentary footage of political turmoil from the 1970s, which does set a serious tone. The opening half of the film has minimal violence and focuses on the interactions between these extremist characters. There are a few animalistic sex scenes, I guess you could call them. The girlfriend here, who's kind of in control of the group temporarily, she's pretty sex crazed and likes to sleep with everyone while her boyfriend is in prison. And generally speaking, the characters hang around, they sleep with each other, and they eat. There are a few scenes with characters doing dances with masks on, and it feels like there's some filler material in the opening half, at least the first time I saw this. Now, there is a power dynamic where the men in the group argue with the girlfriend over some of her decisions, and so much so, in fact, that one of the men attempts to stage a mutiny. And there was a lot of potential here for portraying, gradually escalating conflicts that spiral out of control, but some of that potential is left untapped, leaving a story that does not have as much tension, suspense, or interest as it could have provided. There is a psychological angle present, which should support the acts of violence, but I do feel like the character development could have been better here. From a script writing standpoint, that can always be accomplished regardless of budget. Good characters can always be accomplished. So I did feel it fell a little bit short in that regard. Now, the first time I watched this movie, I was bored for a while. But after repeat viewings, I do have a slighter, more appreciation for the opening half, kind of like the setup time. Maybe that's because I'm slightly more familiar with the radical student movements from the 60s and 70s that inspired the movie. But, regardless of the reason, I did find myself appreciating the downtime moments a little bit more during my recent viewing. So, there are some flashes of style, especially a few shots with a deep red hue and some 4 shots with a deep blue hue. Performances are good across the board, especially when considering the low budget. So, when I'm recommending this movie, who exactly would enjoy Kichiku Dai Enkai? I can't strongly recommend it to fans of psychological, political, dramatic thrillers, because the script really isn't strong enough to thoroughly explore those elements. And I also cannot strongly recommend it to gorehounds, because you have to wait for an hour before that exploitative element really starts to ramp up. So if you land entirely in one of those camps, you're probably going to struggle with this movie. Instead, I would recommend this for people who are kind of wanting a mix of both. If the premise intrigues you and you do enjoy splatter movies, give it a shot. At the very least, you're not going to forget it anytime soon. Even the first time I saw this movie, like 15 plus years ago, there were 2 death scenes that I never forgot. And they're just kind of like burned into your mind. So at the very least, you're not going to forget this easily. So, I guess that's a positive for sure. So I guess you could say this is like a cautious recommendation for a certain type of viewer. But worth a watch, I think, if you can stomach it. Most readily available on DVD, which also has some informative special features like interviews, behind the scenes, that type of thing. Let me know what you think of this one. And would this be in the upper echelon of violent movies in your opinion? And as always, I will see you next time.